It's the After Show with TelecomTV's Guy Daniels and Ray LeMaitre.
Welcome to the After Show on Telecom TV. I'm Guy Daniels, Director of Content, and we are broadcasting live and waiting to hear from you, our audience, at the end of day one of the DSP Leaders Open Telco Summit. And we have a great lineup of guests joining us again today, primed and ready to answer your questions. We've already received some, but please do keep them coming because we'd like to hear from you. It's all about you, this show, and you can use the form on the website below this video to submit your questions. Well, time to introduce my co-host for the After Show, Ray LeMaitre, Editorial Director at Telecom TV. Hello, Ray. Ready to go?
As ready as I'll ever be, Guy. I'm really looking forward to today's live show following the two excellent roundtable discussions that we put on demand today. And what's important, I think, is that we focused on the areas of open network architectures beyond the radio access network. Open RAN has attracted a lot of attention in the past year, and rightly so, but it's taken the open limelight in many ways. But transport networks have been evolving in very interesting ways in the past couple of years. And of course, open source software is having a major impact on network operator strategies as 5G architectures drag operators into the telco cloud world. So there's an awful lot to talk about, and I'm sure we're going to talk about a lot of it here today. So back over to you, Guy.
Yeah, thanks very much, Ray. Well, time to introduce our guests who are anxiously waiting for our audience questions. So send them in now, don't delay. And joining us live on the programme today are Attilio Zani, Executive Director at TIP, the Telecom Infra Project. Tim Dwaran, who is Senior Director Solution Marketing at Infinera. Rafael Cantor Palancar, Transport and IP Network Manager, Global CTIO at Telefonica I&D. Neil McRae, Managing Director, Architecture and Technology Strategy and Chief Architect, BT Group. And Susan James, Senior Director of Telecommunications Strategy for Red Hat. Hello everybody, good to see you all again. Lots of questions to get through in the next 45 minutes or so. So Ray, over to you to get us started.
Okay, thanks, Guy. Attilio, we're going to start with you, but before we get into the first audience question, a quick question for you, and we've been asking this of all of our guests this year. What got you into telecoms? How did you start your career in this industry?
Thanks, Ray. Well, I started out in the GSM Association. I met a gentleman called Amit Shah, who was the then Chief Strategy Officer of the GSMA. Back in the early 2000s in a cafe in the West End of London, as someone had introduced me. And I got involved in the Rob Conway days. So my first experience of the telecommunications industry was in a trade association. And it was the good old days of GSM advocacy when we were trying desperately to make sure that the world went on a unified collective path. So I had the pleasure of working with Rob Conway, who was a significant leader in industry associations, but also people like Mauro Centinelli and Julio Linares with Telefonica, who's still working hard on pushing the agenda of collective action. David Thody. It was a real time in the early 2000s of like a true period of for the industry, by the industry. So I really cut my teeth on that ideology at the GSM Association. Excellent. And I've loved that sense of collective action ever since.
Great, excellent. And now at the Telecom Infra Project, which everybody's heard, and of course everybody's heard about the GSMA. But let's get on with our first viewer question today. Great to have you on the show today, Attilio. With more and more solutions from vendors coming onto the market, the choices are now wider than ever. So how do telcos discover innovative new solutions? How can they find out what is out there, particularly in the open architecture field?
Yeah, those choices are not only expanding day by day in terms of the vendor availability, both of hardware and software, but also they're becoming increasingly robust, and that is that robust nature of the open network solutions across Open RAN and Open Wi-Fi and other areas like OOPT and disaggregated cell site gateways that we're working on. These areas need to really bring together the supply and the demand. Really, the demand signal from the operators has been phenomenal over the last 5 years. In the introduction, I think you mentioned the fact that operators need to be dragged towards this open ideology. That's not my experience. My experience is that the operator community has really noticed that there's an opportunity here to embrace an open ideology and share their demand signals through Telecom Infra Project and other organizations as well. And that's where the supply side comes in. So we're seeing a growing number of vendor members of TIP supplying excellent solutions. Those excellent solutions can be found by operators in the traditional way of picking up the phone and speaking to members of TIP and others, and running RFIs and RFPs, but also getting involved in that conversation between demand and supply within the Telecom Infra project is key, because as a result of that is where operators actually get to share what it is they want and see that that creation process being delivered, and the result of that is then posted on our website and messaged out to the industry in terms of blueprints are available, what capabilities are coming down the pipeline in terms of meeting requirements with outcomes, right? With features and capabilities of the vendor community, and it's growing all the time. But this isn't a one-time thing, right? It's not a just for now and just for 5G. This is about the fact that we're going to need to see splices of 3G, 4G, 5G, and beyond. That ideology going beyond 5G is really important, because I think once we get through this cycle of purchases in the telecom infra space, there needs to be choice when people come out of this particular cycle, more choice and more choice on an ongoing basis.
Yes, and obviously, there's a lot of work going on at TIP, and a lot of companies are finding each other via TIP. Are there other ways to discover new companies? Does anybody else want to come in here at all and mention other ways for companies to be found, or we can move on to the next question? Oh, Neil.
Yeah, Ray. I mean, being part of the community is the best way. So, Linux Foundation's definitely a starting point. They're doing much more and more in networking, and there's a big community there where people get together virtually at the moment, but they run a lot of open networking forums that are, really technical but really fantastic. I think so. That's one way, but I think it is about going out there, engaging, talking to people, and being an active member of the community. And actually, one of the best ways to get involved is to contribute something. So actually, if you built something in your organization that other telcos or other people could use, because that's the money answer, if you like. If you give something to the open source community, then you can become an expert, and then people will come to you with their ideas or their advice. So, really get involved, contribute, be part of the community, and largely finding out about open source will not be a problem. People will be banging on your doors left, right, and centre.
Okay, great. Yeah, and Susan, you wanted to come in there as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, one of the great things is it is very much a meritocracy. If you want to have a place where you can showcase, the skills or the assets that you can bring, that's a great way of doing it. Plus, you're doing that in an environment where you're getting access to all the key people across the operator community, but also on the supply community. So, absolutely, I would reinforce both what Neil and Attilio said.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Guy and I have seen in the last couple of years just how many senior operator executives attend and really get involved in the events put on by the likes of TIP and the Linux Foundation. And you can see those relationships happening in real time. And hopefully soon, of course, we'll get back and be able to meet and have those face-to-face interactions again before too long. So unless there's any other further observations, I think we'll move on to the next audience question. Guy, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Ray. Tim, same question that Ray has just asked Attilio. We're going to start by asking you, what got you into telecoms? How did you get your start in the industry?
Well, I started out as an electrical engineer, writing a real-time embedded software, not in the telecommunications industry. But I was incredibly fascinated by kind of all things wireless. And wireless technology, and I wanted to go to work on my graduate degree in engineering. And so at that time, Ericsson had actually come into the U.S. and had facilities in both Virginia and then also North Carolina. And so I had an opportunity to head out to Virginia, and Ted Rappaport, who's today at New York University, he had founded something at Virginia Tech called the Mobile and Portable Radio Group, or the MPRG. And so I had a chance to combine both writing real-time embedded software and working in the wireless industry with Ericsson with graduate school at Virginia Tech. And the two were awesome, and I've been in telecommunications and loved it ever since.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Tim. Now, next for your question, and we'll ask you this one, Tim. How do telcos make informed buying decisions for disaggregated networks? Because there's no consumer review site or 5-star rating service. So how do they decide what's going to be best for them?
Yeah, I think every service provider is going to bring their own perspective in terms of their own challenges. But just like Attilio and Neil and Susan were kind of alluding to in the last question, nothing beats personal involvement. And so I think organizations like the Telecom Infra Project, Open Networking Foundation, the Optical Interoperability Forum, all of those organizations really offer an opportunity to get firsthand information and to engage directly with a combination of service providers who might be like-minded, but also the vendor community as well. And they're not just getting together and talking. The important point is that there's also interoperability events that show up in service provider labs. One example might be a Project Phoenix with some of the open optical networking. That's going on right now, and that involves transponder hardware over line systems and mixing and matching of vendor equipment in order to do that. And that is a perfect example of a collaboration to see firsthand how that's working, get results from that, and the rest. In addition to that, obviously the vendors are always trying to publish results and success stories, as are service providers. And you obviously can talk to any other service provider that's there and use those personal relationships to see what somebody else might have experienced. And then ultimately you got to bring it in and into your own lab, and I would argue kick the tires and go through kind of a traditional process there, where you prove to yourself and you build confidence that this is going to serve your purpose, while also helping you maybe with your innovation cycle and have a more open system so that you can have additional innovation cycle go faster in the future.
You still got to do the work yourself, but as you say, get involved, and more than ever, you really got to get involved as disaggregation continues. Attilio, you'd like to come in on this question?
Yeah, I'd love to. I think that's absolutely right. That combination of Neil's previous question about contributing and the last answer about building confidence, having standards builds some level of confidence, but we all know that that's not quite enough because those standards can be deployed in a myriad ways. So testing and validating, and then contributing those tests and those validations, those blueprints, as we call them in the Telecom Infra project, to the community to then, again, harden those solutions and continually test and kick the tires and test them out in different network environments is absolutely essential. But then it's sharing those understandings and those insights with the community so that we can all have better products and solutions in this open network environment. And OOPT is a wonderful example of that. There are a significant and growing number of solutions in the marketplace from a number of different vendors that have gone through that self-same process, building wonderful confidence among the operator community and adjacent industries as well, for that matter.
Thank you, Attilio. And Susan?
Yeah, I think it is up to a number of those operators like BT, like Verizon, AT&T, the big guys that have that capability to take early technology to the market to do that proving. And then I think you tend to see then, lots of the other operator community that don't necessarily have that muscle to be able to do that themselves. I mean, they do look to lead operators around the world. It's something they've been doing for years and years and years, and sharing through the different bodies where we get together as an industry and talk. So I think, we'll continue to see that where we have technology leaders that we all look at to see, what are they doing? What can we take away from that? And what can we sort of expand to scale? Because I think it's really about getting that scale into the selection of, the technology that we're going to work with going forward.
Thank you, Susan. Very, very quickly, Attilio, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, totally. Operators of all kinds, those market-leading global organizations, as well as what are commonly referred to as tier 2 and tier 3s, they all know what they want and what they need. And I think it's important for us as a true community in the telecoms industry to recognize the requirements that are coming from different countries and different temperatures of weather, which put different requirements and strains on networks. So I think it's really important that we do a much better job as an entire industry of listening to a broad set of requirements from a broad set of operators in different regions of the world.
Thank you, Attilio. Well, I think, Ray, we should crack on with some more of our audience questions.
Okay, great. Thanks, Guy. And speaking of major international and influential operators, we're going to turn now to Rafael from Telefonica. And Rafael, good to have you on the show today. Can you tell us what got you into the telecoms industry? How did you start in the industry?
Okay. I was afraid that this question will come. I was studying telecom engineering, and so it came as natural. So I was in the university, and I got a scholarship in that time in Telefonica, and I thought, okay, this is I like this, so I got the opportunity to get involved in and I got a job offer. And I started doing building things and building hardware at the time, and we were providing rural coverage for 2G, and so it was great because I saw that we were going there and we were building coverage to small villages that didn't have any wireless before, and people were very happy. So anytime we were there, we're coming there and installing things and deploying the solutions. They were thanking us and they were getting connected. So I think this was very meaningful, and this is something that we believe that they were doing in this industry today, and it's really, really a passion for all of us. This is for me.
Yep. Excellent. It was great to hear that somebody, got into the industry early and stuck with it, because, it's such a fast-moving and enjoyable industry to work in. That's fantastic. So the question we're going to put to you today from our audience, and this is one that crops up very often in these open architecture discussions. who is going to be responsible for developing the best multi-vendor options for network operators? And do telcos want to avoid being the systems integrator? So in these multi-vendor open architectures, who's going to bring all the piece parts together and make it all work together?
Okay, so this is an excellent question. So, first of all, I wouldn't say that telco are avoiding to be the system integrator. I would say that on the one hand, it's true that we are not coming from a blank slate. We are having these blueprints that they permit to avoid risks and to accelerate time to market and to gain also volume and efficiency in the solution. But on the other hand, it's true that disaggregation and openness come with a redefinition of the roles that we have in the ecosystem and in how we telco operators acquire and deploy and operate networks. And many of them are not now in our hands. So I would say that even if most of us, we are now engaged in new operational models, there will be some people, also some operators that maybe are not ready to go that far. So I think that the balance will be in the middle, and there will be different situation for different operators. And for sure, it makes all the sense to start with this lesson learning curve for everyone, and it makes a lot of sense to start with a system integrator and learn and see where the way gets us.
Okay, excellent. And so anybody else want to comment here? Anybody seeing any evidence that systems integrators are stepping up here? Yes, Tim and then Susan.
Yeah, I was just going to comment that the good news is this, we're disaggregating and we're building open interfaces at the same time, and that's important because just because something is functionally disaggregated doesn't mean that day one the service provider has to deploy a complete multi-vendor mix and match approach. There's some option value in deploying at the level of kind of multi-vendor that they're comfortable with, both operationally and from their supply chain and purchasing and all of those aspects as well. And they can evolve with time, replacing or looking at different multi-vendor components that they can plug in. So that maybe they don't have to take on so much in one big step. And then I'll also just say the vendor community in general is certainly doing multi-vendor work in collaboration with TIP and outside of that. But then also there certainly are other larger system integrators for whole networks and the rest that can come to bear as well if needed and depending on the size and scope of the network transformation that's underway. Yeah.
Yes, it does seem there's going to be lots of different models, lots of different ways to approach this. Susan, what are you hearing? What's your experience so far on this?
So I did an interesting exercise a number of months ago when I was looking at, what are the solutions that are out there and what the systems integrators are doing. And I think, I went to maybe 10 different sort of big systems integrators and they already have sort of pre-packaged solutions, if you like, of, putting together a blueprint, putting it together, testing it, doing the end-to-end use cases. So they have already established sort of a best of breed portfolio that they've then sort of glued together and done the work on that, if you want to just pick up the phone and say, I want a solution, they have that offering there, but they also have a services offering that gives you the ability to say, well, I want this piece, and this piece, and they can put that together for you as well. So I would say that, as a overall ecosystem, we're working together much better to create sort of solutions from all of the disaggregated parts. So if you want to go down the path of something that's been sort of pre-integrated with the automation in place, there are a number of systems integrators that already have those things in place. If you want to go down the path of saying, yeah, but I really want this piece and this piece, you have that capability. But to Tim's point, you don't need to say, okay, because I want to bring in multiple vendors, I have to start from a blank sheet of paper. You can start with a base solution and then say, okay, I want the flexibility of adding different components. And I think that's absolutely the right approach, because you can't go with big bang. Let's start with a selected use case with a view to saying, I'm going to build other things into this platform as next steps. And that gives you a good path forward on how to sort of create a base for having a horizontal platform.
Okay, excellent. And Attilio, I saw your hand up there as well.
Yeah, brilliant. I think I think you said it just right. We're seeing the same thing as a trend in the telecom infra project as well. Systems integrators are absolutely stepping up and supplying to the demand of operators in those ways that you described. And I think one thing that we're driving is that ideology of interoperability becoming interchangeability. So I think the more that we do that as an industry, and there's a lot of work to do, and it's not easy, but to get those integrations after integrations shared out to the community, so that there can be greater confidence that these products and solutions, both hardware and software, do work together and do stand up next to each other very well. And then when it comes to operators, I think there will be some group operating businesses who will absolutely be systems integrators. And there will be smaller operators who will also get the benefit of the activity that's working in the industry and say, well, if it's good enough for one of those tier one telcos, then it should be good enough for us as well. And building those blueprints in either themselves or with the help of systems integrators. So I think I think the answer is, there are more answers than there are telcos in the world to this, and everyone has their own strategy and approach to it. But all of those can be facilitated, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to come to Neil next, and then back to Raphael.
Yeah, I mean, I think be careful what you wish for. So, in terms of expertise, I've dealt with a lot of systems and integrators that frankly just don't have what's required to deliver this. And I think some of the vendors behind them are helping them and partnering with them. But I think if you're going to engage with a system integrator, be sure that you're tying down the outcome to paying for it. Otherwise, I think you're in real danger of not getting what you want. And also, just bear in mind, we're going to do this open source thing and this disaggregated thing because it'll make us quicker and make it lower cost and it'll make it all really super duper. Oh, but wait a minute, I need to phone these expensive system integrators over here to make it all work for me. Frankly, that's a bit of a nonsense for me, I think. And in my mind, yeah, I think there are companies to work with for sure to help you. But I think if you're not building that capability inside your own organization, then I don't know how you're going to differentiate with it. I don't know how you're going to really be able to drive the maximum value, the maximum tuning, the maximum capacity out of it. So, I think relying upon the systems integrators is a path to real value loss, in my view.
Okay, interesting perspective. Raphael, you wanted to come in and respond to some of the other comments as well.
Yeah, no, I was just wanted to reinforce some of the comments of my colleagues. So I think that the open interfaces are key here. So if you want to mix and match, the only way forward is to use open interfaces and make sure that then you will be able to exchange and interoperate with different pieces. So that's for sure.
Okay, excellent. So I expect that we'll get some questions from systems integrators asking for Neil's phone number as we go through the rest of the program here. But in the meantime, it'll be interesting to see if further questions do come in the next few minutes. But in the meantime, back over to you, Guy, for the next question.
Yeah, thanks, Ray. And a reminder to our viewers, as Ray just said, keep the questions coming in, please, and we'll get through as many as we can. Right, Neil, we discovered how you got into telecoms during our DSP Leaders World Forum last month. Same for Susan. So let's move straight on to our next audience question for you, obviously. How does the increasing use of open source impact commercial market dynamics in the telecoms industry, and what does this mean for procurement and support processes?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a tremendously important question. In the kind of engineering, architecture, research areas, we love playing with our train sets, but at some point in time we go operational, and our operational teams have to be able to run and manage and build a network. And I think quite often we're not putting enough energy into that. So, you've got to think about, in some respects it's the same, but in other ways it's different. So, we've seen some vendors want to have a different set of SLAs or liabilities around open source software. And kind of my challenge to them is, as well, if it's open source and you're pushing it, it's part of the solution, so you need to pony up to support it. And I think there's this kind of distinction that, well, because it's open source, best efforts apply. I'm not sure that my 30 million mobile subscribers here in the UK would wash that kind of viewpoint. So I think in terms of how you procure this, I actually think you need to understand the supply chain of, if they're bringing in open source, okay, how are they bringing that in? How are they integrating it into their solution? What's the code base that they're working from? What extra security checkpoints are they putting into it? How quick are they updating from the latest open source release, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a different way that you need to manage partners that run open source, but actually largely, it's not hugely different from buying software from a proprietary vendor. But I do think that that to build confidence, we need to be able to step up, and we need to have the confidence that this part of open source that you're getting from, it could be from one of the big vendors, that they're using open source as part of their solution, that they are able to support it in the same way that they're able to support everything that they've written themselves. I think the great news is that because of the community, you can quite clearly see who's doing a good job of that and who's not. It becomes very obvious where things are working, and who's making them work. And I think we've seen that in a number of projects across the open source sphere. You don't want to try and pin people down too much, but you've got to be really clear about what outcome you expect. And, hey, open source vendor, if this doesn't work, you'll be on the front page of BBC News and on the TV, and potentially pulled in front of the Houses of Parliament to explain why we had a problem. So when you put it into that context, you kind of, the realness of this wakes up, and yeah, all that's bad, but actually for me, it's it's the customer, the user, who can't get home because their application's not working because it's got a problem somewhere. So that operational embedding this open source operationally, and working with the right partner to help you do that and make sure that you've got the right skills as well is also important. So, I think a lot to learn in that space, but also a lot that stays the same.
Yeah, thanks, Neil. Just emphasising how crucial support is, and as you said, the stakes are often so high. Susan, you'd like to come in on this one?
Of course. I was so beautifully teed up by Nida. I mean, open source is a development model. It's not necessarily a commercial model. So, that is how we at Red Hat have been. Our CEO Paul Cormier says all the time. We have an open source development model, and that's a completely different view than what your commercial model is towards your customers. And to Neil's point, you don't buy software and think, oh, it's open source, it doesn't need to be as good. I mean, it's open source, and if it's being used in a mission critical application, then absolutely it needs to be mission critical in terms of response times, in terms of SLAs, in terms of security. And I think that's been one of the things that has made open source so successful, is that we've been able to do that. And you don't need to do it all yourself. I mean, if you're basing your products on Linux, then you do what you do with all of the other third-party software you have in your solutions. You have back-to-back agreements with companies that can help you do it, so you don't need to do it all yourself. So I think that's been one of the reasons why Linux has become so widespread, is that you have a number of companies that you can work with that can actually make sure that if you have a problem, you've got someone to call.
Thank you, Susan. Unless anybody else wants to come in on this one, I'll hand it over to Ray, because we've still got a few more questions we'd love to get through. Neil, go on. Yeah.
Just one other small point. One of the things that we've discovered is lots of organizations using the same open source base. And I think this is something we need to be really cautious about. So we have, a big demand to have diversification, we're about to see the UK government publish some findings on that. We need to ensure that, something like Open RAN or anything that's open, that's coming from different suppliers, is genuinely different, and that they have different failure modes, or, they're built in different ways. Otherwise, we risk thinking that, I've got a solution from vendor X and from vendor Y, and actually at the heart of it's the same open source. Are you building the right diversity from that? And again, I think that's another thing that we're not really understanding. And when you look at some of the big failures in networks over the last 20 years, and I've been involved in at least one of them, what we found is actually there was a piece of a standard or an open bit of code that had the same bug that 4 or 5 vendors were using. And that, that's one of the things that keeps me awake at night about open source. But 30 years ago, I founded the first ISP here in the UK running entirely on open source, and we had to do everything ourselves. Now we've got great companies like Red Hat, like Canonical, even Oracle that support Linux, and it is far easier to use open source than it's ever been before. And I don't think that there's a software company in the world that doesn't rely upon open source in some way.
Yeah, quite right. Thanks very much for that, Neil. Ray, over to you for our next question then.
Okay, thanks, Guy. So Susan, as Guy's already said, you previously answered the question about how you got into the industry. So the next question we have from our audience is, to what extent have existing open source initiatives specific to telecoms been a success?
Okay, interesting question. I think you can take that in two ways. I think, open source in telecommunications is absolutely successful, to Neil's point. We've just sort of gone through that extensively. Then in relation to sort of telecom specific projects, I think in some cases I want to time bound that. There's been a number of projects that have been established that have been very successful at achieving their initial mandate. And then I think maybe they've struggled a little bit going forward. But also reflecting on the previous roundtable with with Tim and the team, what I would say is with TIP, which is really interesting, is that we're extending the contribution community to being more than just telcos. There's like, why is Facebook interested in actually contributing to TIP? Well, they're completely dependent on people being connected. And one of the key ways of getting people is through mobile phones, of course. And if we were just dependent on the revenues we as individuals are prepared to pay to our telco providers, that's not going to get the level of investment to get the diversity of ecosystem, which we've just touched on, and to get the pace of rollout that we want to see happening and the pace of innovation that we want to see happening. So I think one of the really interesting communities now is both ORAN and TIP, where we're diversifying our ecosystem, we're increasing the pace of innovation, and that's benefiting not just the telcos who are going to use that, but us as individuals, where we will see an increase in the pace of rollout of new technology, of 5G capabilities globally. So I would highlight some of these newer projects. We've taken a lot of these learnings over the past, and now where we start to see sort of true infrastructure build out that traditionally had to be done by governments that are now happening in an open source environment. So that would be my take on it.
Okay, thank you, Susan. Tim, I saw your hand up there. Yes.
I just add a couple of comments. I think when you look at open source, I always think of the world in kind of two categories. There's open source that is a part of a finished good solution, right? Or a viable, deployable thing. And then there's open source that is a component of a solution. And so when you look at something like Open Network Linux, there's lots of use cases of Open Network Linux or Linux, but I'll just use ONL as an example, that are making their way into telecommunications infrastructure products. At the same time, maybe there's some big open daylight or something where you're trying to put a full kind of finished software automation product in. And I guess I'd just say, I think there's a distinction between those two things, because I think the full finished good is harder than taking components and contributing components that ultimately will make up the finished good product. And then the only other comment I was going to make was, there's open source, but there's also open interfaces. And I do think the push, like with Telecom Infra Project and others with open interfaces, is really benefiting us because it provides some flexibility in the software implementation while having that external interfacing part be common as well. So full pause there.
Okay, great. Thanks, Tim. Okay, if we don't have any other comments, then we'll go. Sorry, I beg your pardon, Raphael.
Yes, I would just wanted to make a comment. So I think that open source has been very successful in our world, in the telco world, especially in NFP, for example. But sometimes we mix openness and open source. So I think that the open-closed dichotomy is not really helpful. So because what we really need is to deploy the right technology with the flexibility and the capabilities of having the innovation that we have at any time. And we need to reinforce also that protect the investment of the companies coming here. So I think that the important thing is to have an open solution. If it's open source, it's great, but we will be needing an ecosystem supporting the SLAs that are required for a telco deployment. We need to have 5 nines in our network, and we cannot fail. So that's for sure.
Yeah, excellent point, Raphael. Absolutely, great to have diversity, but at the end of the day, it's horses for courses, isn't it? Okay, Guy, over to you for whatever we're doing next.
Yeah, thanks, Ray. Well, before we get and move on to our next viewer questions, let me quickly tell you about the series of polls we're running. So for each day of the Open Telco Summit, we are posting a new poll question on the website related to the theme of the day. And each question is a simple multiple choice. So just click on your choice of answer to make your vote count. And today's question is, when will open network architectures dominate deployments in mobile and fixed access networks? And if I strain across to the end of the studio here, I can just about see the numbers. This is a live poll results page coming in. Well, okay, it's quite split there, isn't it? Sometime between now and the end of the decade, probably the second half of the decade's looking more likely. Well, look, we'll keep the polls running all week and we'll analyse the results later on TelecomTV. Right, back to our Q&A, because we've still got time for a few more questions. We want to answer as many of them as we can. We've had a late surge, as we often tend to do on the after show. Ray, have you got another question that we can address?
Yes, we definitely have had the late surge. So here's a question I'm going to put out to the whole panel here today, and this really I think this focuses here on with the advent and talk about open architectures. There's a lot more talk as well about industry collaboration and companies working together, and particularly vendors having to work more closely together to deliver the solutions that the network operators want. And the question is, how can the industry best ensure healthy co-opetition between vendors to ensure success for the operators in what are really complex open environments? So, how is everybody going to play together but still be competitive in these open architecture environments? Anybody want to take on that question first?
Sure, I can. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Susan, and then Neil, and then I think Attilio. Okay, Susan.
Yeah. Well, I think, what we've seen is this evolution that started with NFV, where, we did have some open source projects upstream that tried putting things together and testing it, but the reality is that it needs to be based on commercial software. So I know that we're making huge investments in actually building environments, doing certifications, making sure the software has seen each other before it goes out to service providers. And, a lot, we talked about a number of the systems integrators. We're working with both system integrators and, Ericsson made an announcement last week, I think on their Open Network Lab, and you look at the number of players that are in there. The software's seeing it's all of the different components before it ever makes it into the service providers' networks in most cases. So I think you see more and more of these labs that are being built, a lot more collaboration in making sure that they work, because at the end of the day, if your software hasn't met before it meets in the customer's location, you're going to hit more problems. And a lot of the prerequisites to getting into these environments is, have you done testing before? So I think the amount of pre-work that's being done now is probably greater than at any other point in time.
Okay, Neil, over to you.
I mean, it doesn't change. Just to be ruthless with your demands. Don't take. I never compromise with my suppliers, and they know what's expected of us. That means they have to find ways to be leading, and my advice to all of them: you have to work together, but be leading in your area of expertise. Our customers demand more from the network every day, so I'm going to be demanding more from all of those suppliers. And I think the testing point is really crucially important. I actually think in some respects that might be one of the Achilles heels we face, but today we run #1 network in the UK, and we're going to be running #1 network 5 years from now, 10 years from now, as we put more open source into it. And we're going to be ruthless about what our expectations is, irrespective of the solution, frankly. Okay, great. Well, that's a very clear message for companies out there wanting to get on board and be a part of this evolution. Attilio, did you want to come in there as well?
Yeah, I think I love the use of the word co-opetition. It's about common requirements, right? And we spoke about it in the last question. Having web scalers and telcos and manufacturing companies all supplying their demands, as Neil rightly says, they need to be listened to very clearly. But then when it comes to seeing the willingness in the vendor community to participate shoulder to shoulder in an open building process, right? So we build in the open, we're not open source. As Susan rightly alluded to earlier on as well, that then gives us an opportunity to, get the products and solutions, whether it's point products or broad end-to-end solutions, to a point where there's enough confidence in the marketplace, beyond which, people like Raphael and Neil and other operators can demand, best-in-class solutions that are a little bit different. That differentiation area is really, really important. So it's about finding that line of co-opetition, pre-commercial, and then going and having commercial conversations and helping operators differentiate their services from each other in the marketplace.
Okay. And Tim, I can see your hand up there, and I do wonder if this question has come from somebody who's maybe been stung in the past from being a being a partner and they're not finding they got their fair share of the spoils. But Tim, what's your view on co-opetition in these open architectures?
I just wanted to pull together a couple of threads that came through there. The open and the collaboration certainly needed across vendors to help realize these open networks in a multi-vendor environment. At the same time, though, Neil alluded to it and others, which is we still have to incent innovation, and we still expect innovation. And so while we need to plug into the network at various interface levels and in an open manner, we also want to continue to encourage innovation. And innovation is going to drive, really the network forward far more than a simple act of commoditization ever would. So yeah, it's critical that we be open. At the same time, we continue to perpetuate innovation and support that as well.
Okay, excellent. So I can see the red light flashing in the corner of our virtual studio, which means that we're coming up to the close of time. But Guy, have we got time to maybe squeeze one more in, because we have had this late flood as ever. We've got we've got enough questions for another 3 hours now.
We do. We could be here all night. We'd love to get one more in, because we are appreciative of our viewers sending in their questions. So maybe we'll try and get this last question in, and if you could give quite succinct answers, that would be appreciated. So here's the last question for today, and the ones that we don't answer, we'll try and hold over and answer and ask tomorrow. So the question is: the major operators have been telling their shareholders since the year 2000 that by reducing the number of suppliers, they can save a lot of money. Was that a mistake, and why should they change their strategy? Who would like to? Oh, Neil, please.
So let me give you some real facts. When I joined BT, which is roughly 10 years ago, in the 21C fixed network, we had about 45 to 50 vendors. I reduced it to 4 and saved about £1 billion over 3 years. So, when people come, and all it was reducing complexity. Not only that, at the same time, we were ranked 9th in the Ofcom ISP stats. We're now ranked number 1. So, when I look at that, complexity is the killer in telcos. We struggle to deal with it. And I think that is, when I hear about these open architectures where there's 50 different vendors or even 5 involved, I run for the hills, because frankly, we're just not geared to operate like that. So in my mind, it was the right thing to do. It's the right thing to keep pushing for value from those suppliers. But at the same time, I think there's some other things. We got a silicon chip shortage right now. We're all running around panicking about diversity of supply in RAN, when actually there's a whole load of other diversity of supply issues that we aren't really tackling, including silicon and semiconductors. And actually Infinera, a great company that develop a lot of their own technology in this space. We need more companies like Infinera to come out and develop their technology and get it to market, because without that, it doesn't matter how much software you've got, it ain't going to deliver what we need in the network.
Thanks, Neil. And you can't argue with those savings. Those were huge numbers you quoted there. Susan, you popped your hand up there to come in. So how do we square this? How do we square those savings that Neil's mentioned with this current move to increase the size of the ecosystem?
Well, he touched on it. I think it's a combination of, we need to have the right cost points. We need to have enough simplicity there, but we also need to have a diverse ecosystem of players. And what we've seen over the last sort of 20 years is less and less suppliers, and it sort of goes in cycles. And I think right now we're starting to see a number of them pop up again. But as long as we have a healthy number of suppliers and that we have enough diverse decisions that will actually keep a healthy number of players in each of those segments of the market, then I think we're fine. But the costs need to be balanced with making sure that we have a healthy industry.
Yeah, thanks, Susan. Anybody? Raphael, please.
Yes, just I wanted to mention that it's true that we need to maintain complexity at bay, and this is very difficult for us for telco operators. But it's we've been making a big effort to consolidate our networks and to simplify the technologies that we have. But the market has also gone through this consolidation and with the number of suppliers. So this is the moment if you increase your level of automation and you deploy an SDN control plane, and this is the moment in which you can think of somehow disaggregating your network and having openness in your network. But for sure, you need to take into account that you need open APIs and standard APIs. And for us, in the case of transport, for example, this is the SDN control plane.
Great, thanks, Rafael. Any final quick comments from our guests? No? Well, in that case, we are long past closing time. It's therefore officially the end of today's after show. Thank you so much to all of our guests who joined us for this live programme and to our audience for sending in their questions. Now, we'll be back tomorrow with another live after show programme. But before that, we've got a great panel discussion for you on the critical role of the open source community to DSP developments. And don't forget to take part in our polls and send in your questions nice and early. First in, first to be asked.
That's right. If you've got a question to ask, get it in early, because we're on a time crunch on these live shows. As we found out today, we've got loads of questions overhanging now. We'll try and take those to tomorrow. But the bar is now open, which means it's time to wrap up proceedings. So it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him. Goodbye.
The after show was recorded in front of a live online audience.